Hey guys, Zack Mars here, and this is my review of Danny Phantom. Okay, so this episode, The Ultimate Enemy, is the second of the 4 movies that we need to review for this series. And this one is probably, first and foremost, it's probably the darkest episode in the whole series, for what will probably be very obvious reasons, but it is also probably the most important episode, being perfectly honest, because it showcases Danny fighting his most powerful enemy to date, and will most likely be the most powerful enemy he will face for the majority of the series. And while there are definitely villains who come close to matching who we meet in this episode, overall, there's not going to be many villains that are on the same level. But in any case, this episode opens up with Amity Park, 10 years in the future, and we meet an older version of Valerie, who I'm hesitant to picture. She looks about the same. She's just older. She's just a little bit older. But in case we see future Valerie, flying around Amity Park, which is also a lot more futuristic. And also, I should mention this because this will never not be funny. A lot of shows like to predict that the future will have flying cars and things like that. But then we get to the point where we actually, get to the point where their predicted flying cars future appears, and laughably, there's there's nothing of the sort there. But unfortunately, just the whole flying cars in the future, everything will be cool and sleek and futuristic is unfortunately not very realistic, because the quote-unquote future that Danny Phantom predicts is come and gone, and unfortunately that is the whole thing. That's just unfortunately a problem with a lot of time travel stories like this. Just they predict that the future is going to be this grand thing, and then nothing. But in case I'm getting sidetracked, but in case Valerie, the future Valerie is currently going through all of the diagnostic checks on what we discover are ghost shield generators. And what we find out is that everything outside of the generators is completely destroyed, with Amity Park being the only thing still standing. She's of course going through making sure that everything is working properly, and she checks in with her father, who again is also a little bit older, and also seems to suggest that in the future her father will be a lot more accepting of her ghost hunting side gig that she does. So while he was mad in the moment in Rainstorm, it seems that he has since grown to it does imply that he will eventually grow to accept her, and does kind of value her ghost hunting skills. But in case she then checks in, getting sidetracked, she then checks in to tell him that she just checked she's checking the last of the ghost shield generators, and does point out that everything seems perfectly fine with and of course, her father responds that that's great, and that she should hurry up and report back now that she's gone to check all of them. But it is at this point where she suddenly gets a call on her wrist communicator, which we do have. Fortunately, there are some predictions are wrong, some are not. We got those now, which is cool. But in case this is this point where she is then interrupted by a currently unknown threat who greets her like an old friend, and she of course then proceeds to ask him what he wants, and then he points out that what he wants is to actually get inside the ghost shield, which she points out is impossible, pointing out that she doesn't care how powerful he is. Refers to him as Ghost. She doesn't care how powerful he is. Ultimately, he is not getting past the ghost shield. At which point he points out that yes, he's been unsuccessful at getting past the ghost shield until now. At which point the ghost demonstrates a new ability, which winds up shorting out all of the ghost shield generators in one go, and causes the entire ghost shield around Amity Park to collapse. And the ghost asks Valerie if she likes his new ability, calling it the Ghostly Whale. And of course realizing that she and her father are now in danger, because she knows what the ghost is after. immediately goes down to the basement to immediately flies up to the Fenton Works first and foremost to go and to meet her father in the basement, and she of course eventually finds him and does point out that and she tells him that the ghost shield generators are down and that they need to get out of there as quickly as possible, and in the process we see a bunch of people also being escorted into bunkers to keep them safe as well, but it is at this point where we meet this seemingly unnamed enemy who suddenly appears, and what we find out is that it is actually Danny's evil future self. So yeah, that winds up being the big twist of the episode, and they deliberately did that to keep people from figuring out the big twist before it happens. They deliberately kept that a secret, but yeah. In any case, this newly introduced Dark Danny, as the fandom has since come to call him, then gives a brief hello to Valerie before using his ghostly wail to destroy pretty much everything around them, causing the entire lab to be destroyed. And this, of course, results in two ghosts who are referred to as the Observants, meeting with another ghost named Clockwork. And Clockwork has three forms that he alternates between, so I'm gonna picture all of them at the same time. But Clockwork, of course, is at this point where the Observants point out that now that Clockwork knows what's at stake, that he really needs to intervene. And of course, Clockwork points out that he obviously knows that the Observants, according to their oath, cannot change anything. They can only observe. And so, unfortunately, the duty falls to Clockwork to guarantee that everything goes swimmingly and does not and do their dirty work for them, as he puts it. But it's at this point where Clockwork points out that they need to figure for the time being he needs to figure out where it all went. He needs to just make sure that figure out where it all went wrong, so he can prevent the dark future. Because according to them, in order to stop the dark future, Danny Phantom must perish, which of course winds up being the main conflict of the special. But in any case, it's at this point where we actually catch up with modern day Danny, who is in an assembly Mr. Lancer is currently holding an assembly in front of everybody. I'm telling them about the career aptitude test, or the CATs. And what he points out is that the CATs, if you get a good grade on them, it will determine your future and will determine how successful you are in life. Case in point, he has two examples next to him. Of course, there's Danny's sister Jazz, who Danny kind of mockingly points out alongside Lancer has the highest grade of anyone who's ever taken the CATs, and so she has the most guaranteed future of anybody. On the other hand, he has next to him Irving Burns, who is, or as he puts it, Irving Third Degree Burns, which he then proceeds to refer to as as it turns out, is the manager of the Nasty Burger, and points out that as the manager of the Nasty Burger, he obviously did not do well on his CATs, and now works in fast food for the rest of his life. And of course, this is this point where Irving gets up and does point out that it's not that it isn't as simple as it sounds, pointing out that the Nasty Burger's signature sauce isn't just about, like, it's not just about fast food. The Nasty Burger's signature sauce has to be kept at a certain temperature at all times, or it'll potentially blow up and level a city block. So yeah, he points out that it is in fact a very responsible job, but when nobody really cares, he leaves, frustrated about the fact that he's clearly talking to himself. So and of course, it is at this point where Lancer points out that obviously they will have to study as hard as they can for the CATs to make sure that they get a good career aptitude, and of course he then proceeds to point out that obviously it is their future, and then also remarks that if they want to side with Fries with that. So of course it's at this point where he proceeds to leave, but not before tucking the CAT's answer sheet in a briefcase that he then handcuffs to himself, to keep it doubly safe, so that nobody steals it. But in case, he then proceeds to walk out of the auditorium, with Danny, of course, being frustrated because he knows that the CATs are going to put him under a lot of stress. So he quickly does point out that he's not particularly excited to take them. Well, Sam and Tucker also point out that they're not particularly excited because, it's a very stressful, test to take because it'll determine your entire life. But, I guess it is at this point where Clockwork then proceeds to skip ahead in time to where Danny is actually studying for the CATs. And, of course, he points out that, in order to, give Danny a chance to, he points out that instead of destroying Danny, he's going to give him a chance to redeem himself and potentially stop the alternate evil future that he's seen. So, with that, he then proceeds to get ready to ambush Danny with a new villain to kind of determine if he's going to do the right thing or not. And it is at this point where Danny is currently studying for the CATs, and obviously he's trying to determine if whether or not he's going to do well at it. And Jazz is kind of helicoptering over him, and makes an odd noise every time he goes to make an answer, and he's of course frustrated, pointing out that obviously he understands that the test is important, and that Jazz is not helping, like at all. He points out that she's brilliant, he's not. And he obviously points out that he doesn't. They really wish she would not rub it in, as he puts it. But she points out that she's only trying to help with his CAT so they can have a good future. But it's at this point where Jack and Maddie walk in, and Jack does point out that he sees that Danny is preparing for the CATs, but also proceeds to point out that obviously he never really did well on the CATs, but not that stopped him from having a good future, because yes, he's a little obsessed with ghost hunting, but he's also a brilliant inventor. So, the CATs obviously don't really mean all that much to him, because, despite that, he still has what he considers a good future. He's providing for his family using patents for his inventions. He and his family are pretty much set for life. They never have to worry about anything. So, the CATs kind of don't matter in that context. He's the exception to the rule. But in case at this point where he leaves, but not before Danny gets beamed in the back of the head with their latest invention, what he refers to as the boomerang. And essentially, what the boomerang does is it locks onto a ghost's particular genetic signature, and will constantly home in on them regardless of where they are or when they are. So, of course, Maddie also points out that she finds it extremely weird that it's homing in on Danny, but also decides it's not really important and they leave. But in case, is at this point where, as Danny is trying to get Jazz to leave so that he can finish studying, it's at this point where time suddenly stops, and at which point Clockwork appears with a new ghost, and he then proceeds to place a strange medallion around her neck, which and proceeds to tell, it's at this point where the newly introduced ghost wakes up, and she is obviously very visibly confused as to what's going on, and it's at this point where Clockwork then proceeds to tell the ghost that it's 10 years before she was born, and tells them that he needs her to do something very important for him. And asks her to put on a pretty big show so that he can potentially figure out what if Janie will make a good choice or not. At which point he leaves and restarts time, which with both Jazz and Danny being very visibly confused once Danny's ghost sense suddenly goes off, and suddenly there's just a ghost in his house with no real explanation as to how it got there or when. So. And of course, at this point where Jazz, of course, leaves to go, quote unquote, go get help. At which point, Danny then proceeds to go ghost and demands to know who this new ghost is. And this is at this point where the ghost then proceeds to introduce itself as the Box Lunch, which is who is essentially the daughter of the Box Ghost and the Lunch Lady, which of course Danny remarks is ew. But in case this is this point where she proceeds to, in case in point, as being the daughter of both of them, she obviously has both of their powers, and also both of their mannerisms. She not only does she constantly flip between not only she's bipolar like her mother, so she'll flip between calm and enraged at the drop of a pin. But she also is a lot like her father, in which she'll just exclaim a bunch of things when she doesn't need to. So and overall that winds up for a pretty funny villain. But in any case, at this point where she of course insists that she's going to be the meal, provide the meal of his doom. At which point she proceeds to demonstrate that in keeping with she also has both of her parents' powers, and that she can not only control food, but also the food that's inside containers, because that was a limit, because she has the abilities of both. She can control boxes and she can control food, which means she can control canned food. Case in point, she makes a mech out of herself. She makes a mech for herself made out of canned food, and I find that amazing. But of course, Danny at this point proceeds to knock her out of her armor, and proceeds to send her flying, and they proceed to go fight in the general direction of the Nasty Burger. And meanwhile, we find out Mr. Lancer is eating lunch at the Nasty Burger. At which point, Sam and Tucker walk up to him and do point out that they're looking forward to the CATs, and do point out that they're looking forward to hopefully determining the rest of their future. And of course, Mr. Lancer does point out that it's great that they want to learn, but also isn't an idiot and knows that they're also there to try and maybe take a peek at the answer sheets, which of course they adamantly deny. But he does point out that they're not going to see the answer sheets because the answer sheets are very much safe inside his briefcase, where nobody can actually get to it. So he does point that out. But in case as they're currently talking about all this, they then see the fight between Box Lunch and Danny Phantom, and immediately realize something, and with Sam and Tucker immediately realizing something is going on, and they immediately excuse themselves to go help. But Mr. Lancer is just very visibly confused, but does ultimately stay to watch because he's a little interested to see what's going to happen. But he sees this point where, as they're fighting in the Nasty Burger, once again, we do find out about the Nasty Burger's secret sauce, which is that and obviously two employees proceed to leave, pointing out that it's not worth dealing with a ghost attack for minimum wage. But Mr. Burns does holler after them. Not the same Mr. Burns we know, but Mr. Burns, not the Mr. Burns from Simpsons, but still a Mr. Burns. But in any case, Mr. Burns then proceeds to tell them that you need to come back because they swore an oath to make sure that the nasty sauce didn't overheat no matter what. And this is at this point where Danny figures out how he's supposed to actually defeat Box Lunch, which is that he can use, and then proceeds to scoop up a packet of nasty sauce to fling at Box Lunch's head, and then blast it with his ghost rays to make it blow up, which of course winds up being a problem, causing a much bigger problem. We'll get to that, but they are both sent flying free from the Nasty Burger. And here's where the bit of the twist comes in, where obviously as Mr. Lancer, as I said, he stayed to watch the fight. So when the explosion goes off, he immediately puts the suitcase in front of himself to defend himself. And in the process, Danny winds up phasing through him, through the suitcase, through the briefcase, and winds up accidentally getting the CAT answer sheet stuck to himself, which of course winds up becoming the main conflict of the episode, of the special. But because we find out that that's ultimately we find out that's the thing that ultimately sets Danny on a dark path. We find that out in the special. But in any case, also because of that, the Nasty Burger one of the girls from the Nasty Burger accidentally winds up way too close to the boilers that contain the Nasty Burger signature sauce, and the Nasty Burger boiler starts to overheat. So that also winds up being a conflict of the episode. But in case Sam and Tucker are hoping that Danny's all right, and he points out that and also wonders who that new ghost he fought was. At which point he proceeds to explain that yes, he actually fought Box Lunch, who was obviously the daughter of both the lunch lady and the box ghost, which they do point out is all again gross. But And I don't know, but of course is this point where Danny's trying to figure out what exactly is what exactly is happening, and Tucker in the process goes over to where the Nasty Burger is, and proceeds to pull out to find a strange medallion that Clockwork placed around Box Lunch's neck, and it's implied Box Lunch got out safe and sound, because even though there was an explosion that she was in point blank range, it seems to have like the fact that her medallion fell off seems to have suggested that she's fine, because as we find out later with what the medallions actually do. But of course Tucker's a little confused as to what it is, pointing out that it's clearly some sort of medallion, but he is going to take it back home to experiment on it and try and figure out what it does. But of course, it's at this point where Danny finally discovers that the CAT answer sheet has been stuck to his backside, and quickly realizing that he now has the CATs and has the opportunity to cheat. And so he realizes he essentially realizes what happened, but he realizes that he has potentially a golden ticket. But of course, Sam and Tucker tell him that he should really consider returning it, pointing out that it's not only is it not his, but he also points out that it could very well doom his future, because he's obviously going to be cheating on the CATs, which obviously he's not supposed to do. But of course, Danny insists that that it'll probably be fine, and this is this point where pointing out that obviously he's going to have to figure out what to do with it, but does ultimately decide to keep it for the time being, because he needs to figure out the perfect opportunity to quote unquote return it. So unfortunately for that, we find out that Clockwork apparently points out that he's clearly observes that Danny made the wrong choice, and that now, because of that, his future, as he puts it, has been sealed. At which point we see a montage of a bunch of things that happened in the special that have not happened yet, but based on what Clockwork says, will happen now that Danny's taken the CAT answer sheet. But meanwhile, it's at this point where Danny proceeds to bring the CAT answer sheet home, while Tucker is using his PDA to try and hack into the medallion that they found, which of course he points out he doesn't fully understand how it works, because it points out that it's way more advanced than he has, but points out that it's clearly some sort of ghost technology, but he has no idea what it actually does or how it works. But And of course, Danny points out that that's weird, and he has no idea what it is, what it's supposed to do, or what it is. But and of course, Danny proceeds to. But of course, Sam also points out that he has yet to return the CATs, and Danny once again points out that he's waiting for the right moment to return it. But and of course, he also points out that he's obviously very visibly frustrated, because obviously this is his future, and he's very worried that he won't do well on the CATs. And doesn't see a good reason why he shouldn't pop the seal on the CAT answer sheets and look at the answers. But and of course, once again, and Tucker then proceeds to object, pointing out that really he doesn't think that's the best idea. But Sam proceeds to tell him that if he wants to ruin his future, then he's more than welcome to do it. At which point, as Danny is about to pop the seal on the CAT answer sheets, it's at this point where Once again, Clockwork sends yet another ghost after Danny. Skulk Tech 9.9, which, as the name implies, is exactly who it sounds like. It's Skulker and Technus merged into one mechanical body, and of course makes sense when you think about it. They both use technology to further their goals for different reasons, of course. Obviously, Technus uses them because that's his main power, while Skulker uses it because he's otherwise a tiny little blob thing without his suit. But any case, Sam and Tucker are happy about the fact that Skulk Tech has arrived. Pointing out very relieved that he came right as Danny was about to pop open the answer sheets and look at the answers. But and of course, it's at this point where they also realize that they need to, act surprised. So they proceed to, hide the fact that they're grateful that he's there. But yeah, but of course Danny proceeds to wonder who this guy is supposed to be, and of course at this point where Skulltech proceeds to introduce themselves as, obviously, the world's ghost hunter's greatest hunter, the ghost world's greatest hunter with the machine master of technology, the Ghost Master of Technology as its power source, as its operating system. And of course it's at this point where they proceed to attack Danny. And in the process, Danny discovers not only they're really extremely powerful together, because they're combining things they already did well, but by making them more powerful, making themselves more powerful. But Danny, of course, is curious. Doesn't fully understand why they're attacking him. But it's at this point where Skulltech proceeds to point out that that Danny has given them a lot of trouble in the future. And they point out by taking out Danny in the present, they will probably never have to face him, which of course causes Danny to become confused as to what kind of person he winds up becoming in the future. But of course, it's at this point where Skulltech is about to finish Danny when suddenly their suit starts overriding, and it's revealed that Tucker, in the process, has successfully once again hacked into their suit using his PDA and bound them to the same schedule mechanic, which Tucker points out he doesn't even know is either great for him or sad for them, because obviously he doesn't think they've learned from their lesson. But of course, once again, Skulltech actually reveals that they do have a plan for such a scenario, pointing out that they actually have something called the Purpleback Gorilla Override Program, which Skulker urges his better half to use, but Technus just tells Skulker how to do his job. But in case, Skulltech then proceeds to eventually set in the Purpleback Gorilla Override Program and continues to battle with Danny, and of course Danny starts fighting with them, but eventually it is discovered that they do have a weapon that specifically is designed to counteract Danny's ghost powers. It essentially works similar to the Plasmius Maximus, but they essentially are able to temporarily short out Danny's ghost powers, which of course only causes Danny to become more confused, because they proceed to point out that they developed the weapon for Danny, but point out that it doesn't work on him in the future, but points out that it'll work on present Danny just fine. Which of course again causes Danny to become confused, wondering what exactly it is they're talking about. But is of course at this point where Danny just barely is able to grab a hold of a flagpole, which he comments he didn't think would work, and pointing out for sure that he thought it would break, and of course it does. At which point he proceeds to fall, but is just barely able to turn into his ghost mode. But it's at this point where Skulltech proceeds to, grab onto him with a mechanical arm, which just wraps around Danny's waist. And before Skulltech can actually finish Danny off, it's at this point where Tucker once again hacks into their suit with his PDA, causing Skulltech to lose their ability to fly temporarily. And again, similarly to what Danny just did, where the flagpole broke when they held onto it, but happens a lot faster because of course they're a little bit heavier. This causes Skulltech to land on top of a bright light, a light post, which does wind up taking them out of commission. And of course, now happy about the fact that they've successfully dealt with Skulltech, they then proceed to move on to see if they can figure out how to get Danny out of Skulltech's grip. And they do start trying to pull on it, but unbeknownst to any of them, Skulltech's medallion proceeds to fall off. It's revealed that he was also wearing one, and it's at this point where Danny, of course, all three of them plus Skulltech are sent back to wherever it is Skulltech came from. At which point they arrive in Clockwork's lair, which we did not see from the outside, but up until this point, but Danny is confused as to where they are, pointing out that they're clearly in the ghost zone, but it's never been any part of the ghost zone that he's ever been to. But of course, Danny and of course is this point where Tucker spies a wall of the medallions and realizes that they clearly came from here. Whatever's going on, clearly the amulets are responsible. But of course, Danny still doesn't fully understand why Skulltech and Box Lunch were after him. Is because that does explain that they were sent by the same person. But And of course, it's of course at this point where Sam reveals that she knows exactly why. As she points out to it, she points out that Danny has become quite a jerk in the future. As we find out, we then see Dark Danny proceeding to decimate an entire army of people in armored vehicles, might I mention, with only his ghostly wail and nothing else. Pointing out that he has become extremely powerful and has successfully fought off the last of humanity on his lonesome. But of course, this causes and of course, Sam points out that this is obviously a dark future that they're pointing out that seemingly cheating on the CATs has led to this exact moment. But of course, Danny isn't really paying attention because he notes that the ghostly wail is a cool power and he hopes he gets it one day, which winds up being foreshadowing. But of course, at this point where they still don't know, where they do need to figure out what exactly is going on, so they decide. So it's at this point where Tucker decides to try and hack into Sculptech's armor again and see if he can grill the gruesome twosome for answers. But before he can talk to either villain who are sharing a suit, it's at this point where Sculptech then proceeds to fly into the portal that Zandy observed his future through, and they then wonder exactly what happened with Tucker claiming that he didn't do it. At which point, Clockwork properly introduces himself to Danny and explains that he was the one who did it, and pointing out that he was the one that he ultimately sends Sculptech back to his own time, but also corrects that it might more so be forward to his own time, pointing out that for him, time is kind of relative. But and of course, Danny is confused as to who this guy is, but it proceeds to go ghost. It's at this point where Clockwork then proceeds to explain that obviously he explains that he was sent to destroy Danny and prevent the dark future that he just saw. And of course, Danny points out that that's not going to happen, and proceeds to confront Clockwork, but quickly discovers that Clockwork is just a mite too powerful for Danny to handle, revealing that because he can essentially manipulate time and tell it what to do. Unfortunately, Danny cannot actually lay a single hit on Clockwork, who just uses his time powers to stop Danny in his tracks, move out of the way, and then proceeds to, and then make him run into things, but while Danny is unable to do anything. And also, he proceeds to also rewind time to make Danny smack into things as many times as he wants. And overall, including the bell that's in his clock tower. But overall, Danny is just unable to actually touch Clockwork. But of course, it's at this point where Tucker is very visibly confused as to what's going on, and wonders why they can see why their time powers are affecting Danny and nobody else. But then discover that Sam is also being rewound by time, and then figures out what happened. Because he went to go fiddle with the time medallions and picked one up, he is now immune to the flow of time, which of course he realizes that he can use to his advantage, and immediately goes to scoop up 2 more time medallions, which he then places on Sam and passes to Danny, so that they can actually level the playing field a little bit. But Clockwork proceeds to point out that that's not going to work as well as they think it's going to work, so he proceeds to use his ghost powers to summon multiple past versions of himself, all from different time periods. And but of course, Danny pointing out that he doesn't really think, with Clockwork pointing out that there is no escape for Danny. Danny perceives that the only way to go is to the future, which of course he then proceeds to grab Sam and Tucker and pulls them into the portal with of course Clockwork musing that this could be interesting, pointing out that it's finally time that Danny did figure out the future that he has set for himself, and whether or not he can fix it. And of course, it is at this point where Danny, of course, arrives with Sam and Tucker in the ruined Amity Park, which they look around and points out that is obviously very, very bleak, and pointing out that, of course, if Tucker points out that obviously if everything's been destroyed, that he doesn't have much prospects for the future and wonders if the CAT even matters at this point. But it's at this point where, as they're trying to figure out what's going on and why Amity Park is destroyed, it's at this point where they do meet Future Valerie, who immediately attacks Danny and tries to destroy him. And of course, Danny is very visibly confused, because she's obviously pointing out that he's obviously destroyed everything and caused all of this. So and with Danny being very confused as to what she's talking about, and then proceeds to, and is about to destroy him, pointing out that once he's gone they can finally rebuild. But it's at this point where Sam and Tucker intervene, telling Valerie that she's got the wrong idea. And this causes future Valerie to kind of go into a bit of a nervous break, because she points out that they're supposed to be dead. Which of course causes Tucker to really wonder if the CADs are important if he's supposed to be dead. But of course this causes them both to just go for a loop. At which point she points out that it has to be a trick, pointing out that there's no way they could be alive. But it is at this point where she is confronted by Dark Danny, who obviously uses his ghost powers to freeze Sam and Tucker in place, while he proceeds to battle Valerie, realizing that what's actually happening. That there's now two versions of Danny, and one is from the past, while one is the actual Danny that destroyed their entire world. But it's at this point where she and Danny and Dark Danny fight. But what we quickly see, and this is probably one of my favorite things from this special. Dark Danny, obviously, Dark Danny is obviously supposed to be the quote-unquote hero, because, you know, he's a future version of Danny. But because we're not supposed to root for him, they actually changed Danny's theme song so that it actually be a lot more sinister. I do like that. They pitched it down. They upped up the sinisterness of the electric guitar. I do like it quite a bit. But eventually, Danny realizes that Valerie is very, very much in danger. So he immediately once he gets knocked through a wall, he immediately uses his ghost powers to grab her and turn her inchangeable so that she doesn't slam into any buildings. And of course, Valerie, finally realizing that he is finally the Danny from the past, does point out that she almost forgot how cute he was before all of this happened. With Danny just being happy that an older woman thought he was cute, and also kind of implies that that he now knows that Valerie thinks he's cute. So, but in case at this point where Dark Danny then proceeds to confront the Tucker and Sam, who's frozen, and does point out that if he still had his humanity left, he points out that this would be a very touching reunion, but does proclaim that he got rid of his human emotions long ago, which again implies something else that we find out about his origins. But he gets to this point where Dark Danny's ghost sense goes off, and he knows that Danny is about to confront him again, and he then just remarks a please before successfully overpowering his past self. And Sam and Tucker, but of course this distracts Dark Danny long enough that Sam and Tucker are able to escape. But of course Dark Danny points out that he's not going to just let them escape, and proceeds to blast the Fenton Works building so that it collapses, and then proceeds to overpower Danny, who is unable to do anything but watch as the building lands on top of his friends. But once that's happened, he proceeds to break away from Dark Danny's grip, but discovers that Sam and Tucker are actually fine because they removed the time medallion, which of course makes him very happy. Which of course he's happy that they got safe. But of course it's at this point where Danny realizes that he can do exactly that to get away from Dark Danny. But Dark Danny then proceeds to grab regular Danny. And he proceeds to point out noticing the time medallions enable them to be there. He does note that Clockwork seems to be meddling again, but points out that he can use this to his advantage by taking the medallion off of Danny and then using his ghost powers to phase it inside of his half ghost counterpart, who then proceeds to pass out. Meanwhile, Sam and Tucker return to the present, with Tucker, of course, noting that Sam seems to have taken off the time medallions because they're not currently in any sort of danger. And they do point out that they obviously need to figure out what's going on with Danny, pointing out that they need to figure out a way to, prevent his dark future. So, and of course it's at this point where they proceed to wonder, where they also note that the Nasty Burger seems to be overheating, and wonders if the Nasty Burger overheating had something to do with their future and about them being dead. So they do point out that they should probably stay the hell away from it before it blows. At which point they see Jazz, who is looking for Danny. As we find out, Mr. Lancer has since noticed that the answer sheet has gone missing, confronted Jazz about it, and to pointing out that he believes her brother had stolen it, implying that Danny might have used his ghost powers to accidentally steal it, pointing out that he doesn't have any proof that it's Danny, but he does admit that he has since realized that Danny might have reached inside somehow and grabbed it. With of course Jazz pointing out that couldn't be possible, but also knows that is 100% possible. So she, of course, in case this is all a long tangent to say, she confronts Sam and Tucker to point out that she needs to find Danny, because obviously Mr. Lancer thinks that he's going to cheat on the CATs, and does point out that she needs to find her brother before he actually does it. So, which of course, Sam and Tucker realize that obviously Danny's in very real danger. But and of course, pointing out that the CATs were also part of the puzzle. Pointing out that him cheating on the CATs also led to his dark future. So for that reason, they realize they need to make sure that Danny doesn't cheat on the CATs. So, but just at this point, we're back in the future. Danny wakes up in ghost-proof restraints and quickly discovers two memorials. The one is for his family and loved ones, which is with the plaque that says "Gone but not forgotten." And then, much more hilariously, but also much more disrespectfully, is a memorial to Mr. Lancer, whose plaque just says "Gone." So, yeah, even in death, Mr. Lancer cannot catch a break. People are just mean to him for no apparent reason. But, and of course, it is this point where Dark Danny does appear, and it's revealed that he took his past self to the Nasty Burger, where he explains that this is where it all went wrong. And does point out that this is where they all died. So, and does point out that obviously he points out that this is ultimately what Danny's future is going to be. So, and does point out that and of course then proceeds to explain to Danny that he's fused the time medallion inside of Danny so that he can't actually leave the past, which is exactly what he needs Danny to do. And then demonstrates his ability to transform into a human form, even though he was established later to not be able to do that. So it's implied that that's a ghost power that he has now, instead of an actual, extension of being a half ghost. But in case it's at this point where he tells Danny that he needs him out of the way, to enact his plans, which he then proceeds to pull out a time medallion of his own and remarks that that's exactly what he's going to do. But he then proceeds to demonstrate another ghost power that he has, which is that he can now open ghost portals into the ghost zone whenever he wants, and shoves Danny through one. At which point he puts on the time medallion, now in a quote-unquote human form, and then appears back in the present with Of course, Sam and Tucker are happy that Danny seems to be all right, but of course they do note that Danny is acting a little bit odd. So they have no idea what's going on with him, and of course, Dark Danny pretends to be regular Danny, pointing out that he defeated his other half many times over, but which of course he doesn't talk like regular Danny, so they're very concerned. But he does, and also he tries to remember what exactly it is they used to do together, which also again implies that he isn't actually their Danny. But they then proceed to go hang out and also quote unquote study for the CATs. So it's this point where Clockwork and two observants then proceed to see that Clockwork was somewhat successful in his mission, pointing out that while they did say that Clockwork needed to destroy Danny, that he does point out that instead he enabled Danny to return to the present safe and sound, with any inclination that he's evil. And satisfied, the observants leave. So while Clockwork just continues to observe and sees how things play out, and of course it is at this point where Dark Danny proceeds to return back to his quote-unquote home, who is pointing out that he forgot how childish he used to be, and also remarks that his old face. But it's this point where this Jazz walks in to confront Dark Danny about the fact that he used his ghost powers to cheat. And of course he doesn't know what she's talking about, but she points out that she's known the entire time that Danny has been that she's known for a while now that Danny has been a half ghost, and does point out that she knows what he's going through and about how he's used his transformation to fight evil, but does remark that she's also concerned that using his powers for his own betterment, she doesn't think is very going to work out like he thinks it is, and does point out that he needs to stop. And It's of course where Dark Danny both does demonstrate that regular Danny did in fact steal the CAT answers, but also then proceeds to remark that she was always that he does remember that she was always the smart one. At which point he proceeds to transform into his actual true evil ghost form. And this, of course, causes Jazz to realize that the person she's confronting isn't in fact her brother, noting that the boomerang never actually locked in on him. And of course, he does point out that yes, he is not her brother. He is in fact an evil. He is in fact what his brother is going to turn out, what her brother is going to turn out to be. And in order to do that, he does need to ensure that everything that happened to him will happen to her brother. But of course, she at this point proceeds to tell him that he'll be defeated and that he won't be able to be successful in his evil plans. But it's at this point where Dark Danny proceeds to tell her that she doesn't really have that there's no way for Danny to point out how he can get home, pointing out, and then proceeds to frame it as a multiple choice question, with the first option being, of course, that Danny gets home using the Fenton Ghost Portal, which he remarks was destroyed many years ago. Destroyed recently, so he can't get through that way. But it also proceeds to mark that option B is most likely, as he puts it, that pathetic Cheesehead's Ghost Portal, pointing out that once he finds his mortal nemesis, he'll be able to destroy that portal as well. But of course, which causes Jazz to realize that Danny and Vlad have been mortal enemies for a long time. But it's at this point where Dark Danny also points out that the option of Jazz defeating him isn't going to pan out either, because he points out he's way too powerful for her, and points out that she'll never be able to get anybody to believe her that Dark Danny is evil until it's too late. Which only leaves with option D, none of the above. At which point he knocks her out with his ghost powers, and then transforms back into his quote unquote human form, where he then pops the seal on the CAT answer sheets and does know that yes, the answer to the first question is in fact D. So Jazz winds up waking up in her bed, very seemingly believing she's had a nightmare. But is this one where her parents walk in asking how she's feeling, pointing out that Danny said she passed out having helped him study for the CATs, and just left to go take them, which of course makes her realize that she's most likely going to be too late, and immediately runs off to go and confront confront Dark Danny before he can ruin her brother's future. So she immediately grabs the Fenton Ghost Peeler and goes off to the school. Meanwhile, before she leaves, she actually uses the boomerang and attaches a note to it with one of her headbands, telling it to find Danny 10 years in the future, so they can potentially get back and stop his evil self from ruining his future. So then proceeds to pass it into the ghost zone before leaving to go to the school to confront Dark Danny. But in case at this point where we do see the boomerang traveling through the world of the ghost zone, where Danny is revealed to currently be floating through it, and he eventually runs into a future version of the Box Ghost, who has since bulked up and gained a hook and an eye patch, but does point out that they were originally going to seek him out, but also points out that he's very happy that Dark Danny has since wound up at their doorstep, wrapped up like a present. Which of course causes Danny to see the Box Ghost and points out that he's gotten a lot more powerful. At which point the Box Ghost utters his signature "Beware" before blasting him with ghost rays, something that the Box Ghost did not have previously. So, which of course causes Danny to bump into Ember, who has since gained a substantial amount of weight, and of course, Danny proceeds to comment on her appearance, saying that she then proceeds to interrupt him, pointing out that she looks like her musical career fell completely apart after Danny destroyed her vocal cords with his ghostly wail, which of course he points out she was looked a bit more statuesque. So he points out that but she proceeds to knock him away and into Johnny 13, who is now wheelchair bound and missing most of his hair, and of course. We don't find out what Dark Danny did to him, but it's clear that Dark Danny broke his legs. So unfortunately, Johnny 13 is now wheelchair bound permanently with his shadow. He pretty much exclusively uses his shadow to wheel himself around and move anymore, because he can't. he has no working legs anymore. And it's this point where he proceeds to point out that obviously Dark Danny has caused a lot of problems for them, pointing out that it's obviously all their fault that they've wound up like this. But Danny is insistent that he didn't do any of this, because obviously it was Dark Danny who caused this. He hasn't done any of this yet. So of course, he proceeds to point out that he didn't do anything. And when they proceed to not leave him alone and continue, and his enemies continue to attack him, including Skulktack, who joins the group at this point, as well as a future version of Kitty, he proceeds to tell them to get away. At which point he unlocks his ghostly whale and knocks them all out with it. Which, of course, as we find out, the energy from the ghostly whale has the ability to knock Danny out of his ghost mode, which of course, Danny proceeds to note after transforming back into his normal form, and but also does remark that he seems to be going through evil puberty and is very concerned that the future may already be too late for him. But it's at this point where the boomerang proceeds to bonk him in the back of the head, and noting the note from Jazz, he then proceeds to realize that that Vlad is most likely his best lead to actually figure out where he's supposed to go and where he's supposed to confront Vlad. Meanwhile, Dark Danny, posing as regular Danny, then proceeds to cheat on the CATs, much to Sam and Chucker's chagrin. And of course, Mr. Lancer, now knowing that Danny seemingly cheated, then proceeds to confront him about it when Danny brings his test up a lot faster than he should have. And of course, Dark Danny doesn't say anything; he just leaves. And he knows that Jazz is waiting outside with the Fenton Ghost Peeler, so he proceeds to knock her out by making a duplicate of himself to knock her out with. And now satisfied that he's successfully secured his future self's his own existence, he then proceeds to leave while Mr. Lancer calls the Fentonworks hotline, and then tells what is it? And then he proceeds to tell Jack and Maddie that he wants to meet them outside of the Nasty Burger, and tells them to bring Danny. Meanwhile, it's at this point where Danny proceeds to discover Vlad's ghost portal, which Vlad just kind of hid behind a football, which he does note is something that is definitely something Vlad would do. So he then proceeds to go in and go through the ghost portal and confront Vlad. But it's at this point where we meet Future Vlad, and Future Vlad proceeds to ask him if he's willing to kick an old man while he's down. Danny, of course, notes that Vlad has a very haggard appearance, and obviously he's not the same Vlad he knew. He notes that this Vlad has clearly mellowed out significantly, and Vlad then proceeds to explain that 10 years of having no ghost powers will do that. At which point he proceeds to explain exactly how Dark Danny was born, which and of course, Danny is horrified to learn the origins of his evil self. But essentially, what happened was all of Danny's loved ones and Mr. Lancer were killed in the Nasty Burger explosion, which, as we find out, killed them painlessly but also rather gruesomely. But and of course, Danny, left with no other choice, moved in with Vlad, pointing out that as the only person who still understood him. And he does confront Vlad, and of course, evil Vlad does confront Dark. And then, of course, Vlad proceeds to explain how Danny really wanted to no longer feel the pain of having lost all of his loved ones. So Vlad proceeded to honor that idea by using his own version of the Fenton Ghost Gloves to rip Danny Phantom out of Danny Fenton. But this, of course, causes Danny Fenton freely, without his emotions, and obviously still very angry about the fact that his loved ones passed away, then proceeded to use that exact same technique to rip Vlad's ghost half out of him, and then proceeded to overshadow it, causing the two of them to merge into this one horrifying being. And this of course resulted in a ghost that has all of Danny and Vlad's negative traits and none of their positive ones. They're just pure evil. But it's at this point where Danny proceeds to point out that that's pretty messed up, but also proceeds to wonder what exactly happened to his human half. While Vlad just proceeds to somberly say that some things are better left unsaid. The way the special frames it implies that Dark Danny killed his human half. So yeah, pretty dark. But And it's at this point where Danny realizes that he can use this to use what Vlad just said to his advantage, pointing out that he's got a time medallion fused inside of himself, and wonders if Vlad can use the ghost gloves to rip it out of him. And Vlad, of course, then proceeds to pull out the Vladco ghost gloves, because he has his own company. But he proceeds to pull out the ghost gloves, but then also muses the possibility that he could also simply turn on Danny and prevent the dark future that happened by killing him right then and there. Of course, and at which point the scene just cuts to black. But meanwhile, Mr. Lancer does meet with Danny's parents, as well as quote unquote Danny, at the Nasty Burger, and also Tucker and Sam are there, claiming that they need to get out of there as soon as possible, pointing out that the Nasty Burger is about to blow, and they're like 3 feet from it. So and of course points out the danger of that. But Mr. Lancer points out that he doesn't think it's going to blow. At which point he proceeds to explain that to Danny's parents that obviously Danny got a perfect score on the career aptitude test, which means he either studied really well for it or he cheated. Which of course causes both Jack and Maddie to become flabbergasted, pointing at Danny, pointing out that obviously they raised him better than that, and what would compel him to do that. At which point Jazz proceeds to show up in the Fenton Ghost Peeler, telling them that she knows exactly what kind of thing would cause it. At which point she blasts Dark Danny with the Fenton Ghost Peeler to reveal his true form, and responds that that's not actually Danny. At which point both Jack and Maddie immediately spring into action with ghost weapons, and demands to know what Dark Danny did with their son. At which point he only gives an evil laugh and responds that he is their son. At which point he then proceeds to reveal that, obviously they could have prevented the whole evil Danny thing by pointing out that if they had discovered his ghost power sooner, none of this would have happened. And also does mock them, pointing out that there's obvious similarities between Danny Fenton and Danny Phantom's name, and that he's surprised that only Jazz was the one who ultimately figured it out. But in cases at this point where they tell him not to move and telling him that he's not going anywhere. But it's at this point where Dark Danny agrees, pointing out that none of them is going anywhere, pointing out that he's exactly where he needs to be. At which point he proceeds to use his ghost powers to cement them all to the boiler and gags them so they can't scream or talk or anything. It's this point where Jazz tries to confront Dark Danny, pointing the Fenton Ghost Peeler at him, telling him not to move. But it's at this point where Dark Danny proceeds to quickly overshadow her and cements her to the boiler as well after gagging her. And points out that he's sorry that it has to end this way, but also points out that he needs them to die so that he can become his evil future self. But that if it's any consolation, they will die rather painlessly. But is at this point where Danny proceeds to confront his evil future self, much to his surprise, pointing out that he obviously should not be here. But of course, Dark Danny and regular Danny proceed to fight, with Danny reassuring his loved ones that he's never going to turn into Dark Danny, while also turning to Lancer and pointing out that this would probably go some way to explaining all of his unexplained absences. Obviously, Danny's a part-time superhero. Obviously, that would explain why he's suddenly late and a whole bunch of other things. But it's at this point where Dark Danny proceeds to pin Danny against a light post, but Danny proceeds to mock Dark Danny, pointing out that obviously he knows Dark Danny can't kill him, because if Dark Danny ever does kill him, obviously that would erase Dark Danny from existence. But Dark Danny proceeds to tell his past self that that Danny still isn't getting it, pointing out that he's already here and that the future where Danny turns into Dark Danny is ultimately inevitable. At which point the two fight for a brief moment, but it's at this point where Danny, in a last-ditch effort to keep Dark Danny off of him, and with Dark Danny pointing out that their time is up and it's been up for 10 years, Danny then proceeds to use his ghostly will against Dark Danny, much to Dark Danny's surprise, pointing out that he's not supposed to have that power because he doesn't get that power for another 10 years. But it's at this point where Danny tells his future self that it seems that the future isn't as set in stone as his future self thinks it is. At which point he uses another ghostly wail to send Dark Danny flying into a building and collapses, causing Dark Danny to become weakened enough for Danny to catch him in the Fenton thermos. But Dark Danny, of course, points out that it's too late and that Danny will not be able to save him as he's sucked inside the Fenton thermos, ultimately getting the last laugh as he's defeated. And Danny realizes that Dark Danny is right. The Nasty Burger is about to blow, and unfortunately, the ghostly whales drained him, so he is now unable to go ghost and is unable to get to his loved ones in time. But it's at this point where time proceeds to freeze, at which point Clockwork appears. And of course, Clockwork is very satisfied about it does point out that does decide to show Danny something by giving him a time medallion, at which point he discovers that Clockwork has in fact saved all of his loved ones from a gruesome fate. And happy about the fact that Clockwork has saved them, Clockwork then proceeds to point out that this was always his plan. That obviously he points out that watching time is like watching a parade. The observants only see the events as they happen, and while Clockwork sees it more as from above, pointing out that all the twists and turns it could possibly take, and does point out that his job is to ultimately guide everybody to where they're supposed to be, so that they can have a good future. With Danny, of course, realizing that Clockwork knew all of this was going to happen, and knew that Clockwork, that ultimately what was going to happen was that Clockwork's, obviously Clockwork would have to would obviously be able to predict that his loved ones were going to die and prevent it. And Clockwork does point out that yes, he did in fact know everything was going to happen. At which point, he proceeds to take Danny back to the school right as the CITs are about to start. And he then proceeds to hand Danny the answer sheet, pointing out that he's given everybody else a second chance at life. So he then proceeds to ask Danny what he's going to do. And of course, this is this point where Clockwork leaves and resetting time back to where it was. And of course, Danny, first and foremost, the first thing he does is immediately walks up to Mr. Lancer with the CAT answer sheets in hand, and then proceeds to tell him that he accidentally found them outside the Nasty Burger. And of course, Mr. Lancer does note that the seal has been opened, and Danny did point out that he was curious what the answers were, but ultimately decided against it, claiming he's not a cheater. And he claims that he will be more than happy to take the CATs as they're supposed to be taken, rather than having used the answer keys to study. And Mr. Lancer is very much moved by what Danny said, and points out that while he understands that Danny, of course, is not going to be able. This means that Danny isn't going to be able to take the test with the rest of his classmates. Does point out that he'll get a makeup test 1 week from now, where he will be able to properly study for it. And Danny, of course, is very happy about the fact that he gets to find that Mr. Lancer decided to give him a second chance on the test, and does admit that he won't let Mr. Lancer down. And of course, Jess sees all of this from outside the classroom, and realizing that Dark Danny is no longer a thing, she leaves. But in case at this point where Danny, of course, then proceeds to meet her outside the school, and does proceed to wonder how long she knew. And of course, she proceeds to remark that she knew he had the answer keys the entire time, but then explains that that's not actually what he's talking about, and then proceeds to pull out her note, revealing that he knew she had been sent into the future to go set the boomer into the future to go and find him, so that he could prevent his evil self from ruining it. And she of course points out that she's known since Spectra's first appearance as a villain. She's known since the whole situation at the pep rally. But and of course does admit that she's been keeping a secret because she wanted Danny to come to her and tell her when he was ready to tell her. So for that reason, he has not, So for that reason, she points out that he has not, told him yet that she knew, which of course causes Danny to point out that he's satisfied with that, but also points out that he's happy because that means he has another person to share his secret, and pointing out that the two of them that he's very happy to have with his sister have his back. He then proceeds to see another ghost terrorizing the Amity Park, and a massive one, may I mention, that we don't know of, and proceeds to go and confront it with Jazz, of course, telling him to go. And of course, at this point where Danny remarks that he's finally back as the one and only Danny Phantom, better than ever, and proceeds to completely destroy the ghost with its ectoplasm going everywhere. And then, of course, Jazz points out that this is going to take some getting used to. But it's at this point where we see one last scene with Clockwork and the Observants, where the Observants obviously point out that Clockwork seemingly has manipulated Danny Phantom into doing exactly what he wanted, pointing out that, in a word, he cheated. But of course, Clockwork points out that yes, he knows that he did steer Danny away from his dark future. He does point out that the choice to steer himself away from his dark future were ultimately Danny's own, and that he had no real play in the fact that Danny ultimately decided to renounce his dark future. But it is, of course, at this point where he then proceeds to point out that obviously now that Dark Danny has been isolated from the timeline, he is now going to have to assure that Dark Danny never gets out, and then proceeds to place it on a pedestal in his castle, pointing out that he knows that now that Dark Danny exists outside time, he is very much the Clockwork's responsibility. And of course, the episode ends by revealing that Dark Danny is in fact trying to break out of the Fenton Thermos. But he is of course we find out he is unsuccessful at it. So yeah, and that's where the episode ends. So obviously this is a massive special that has a lot to go through it. So we're gonna go through it. Obviously, this episode is the episode where Danny finds out that Valerie has a crush on him. That is obviously the thing. But also, there's the episode where we find out that ghosts can apparently age and make babies, which is weird, considering ghosts are not supposed to be able to do either of those things. But obviously Butch Hartman is quote-unquote claims that ghosts are magical creatures, so there may be an extension of that. That's obviously ghosts can't die of old age, but they can get older and can have kids, which is weird but interesting at the same time. But and I don't really know how to respond to that. But but also this episode, obviously, first and foremost, is the darkest episode in the series because, obviously, it reveals that Danny, if he ever uses his ghost powers for his own betterment, will have ultimately become an evil version of himself. That is what the episode establishes. That is what's going to happen if Danny ever screws up. So, obviously, that's going to be the big thing that obviously the series, that obviously Danny now needs to, make sure that he lives his life right. Otherwise, Dark Danny will show up again. Because obviously, that's what's ultimately Dark Danny's future. If Danny ever uses his ghost powers for his own purposes, Dark Danny can very well come back and become a threat again. Obviously, the main one is contained in a Fenton Thermos outside of time. So Dark Danny, as we know him, is gone. But Also it implies that if Danny ever in a way, Dark Danny can't really be defeated because it is his existence and whether or not he becomes back as a threat is dependent on Danny's own actions and whether or not he decides to use his powers responsibly. So of course that winds up being the big takeaway from the special. That Danny learns how to use his powers more responsibly and not use them for his own gain. That's obviously the main thing that's the main thing that sets him apart from Vlad because Vlad used his powers for his own gain and obviously became an evil ghost man. That's obviously a thing. But of course, I do like the special for that. It is and obviously I should mention this special was originally going to have a sequel, but the show wound up getting cut a lot sooner than it was supposed to. So actually, a lot of things played into the fact that this special never really got a proper follow-up. Until recently, there is a book where they actually do get a rematch. I will probably review that at some point. I should review that at some point. Not sure if it'll be a part of Danny Phantom Month or not, but that is a thing that I will do at some point. But that's ultimately what the special is. It establishes that Danny can't use his powers for his own evil purposes, or he'll doom his entire future and everybody else's. So, that's ultimately the thing. But also, I should mention. This episode has a bit of an interesting conundrum because it uses a pedestrian paradox, which is similar to what I've talked about in Megas Month, where there was a grandfather paradox, where you kill your own grandfather, you stop existing, but that also results in a timeline where you didn't exist. So therefore, how can you kill your grandfather? And creates a big old time thing. But yeah, of course, the pedestrian paradox is similar. Obviously. Dark Danny used his ghost power. Obviously, what happened to Danny was an accident that turned him into Dark Danny. But in the process, Dark Danny now knows how to actually ensure his own evil future by, purposely trying to kill all of his past counterparts' loved ones. But This, of course, winds up in a pedestrian paradox, since, similarly, Danny now knows what not to do to turn into Dark Danny, which means that creates a paradox where Dark Danny comes back in time to ensure his own evil future, but the regular Danny already knows that how to not permanently ensure his own evil future. So, obviously, Dark Danny will never. Obviously, Dark Danny it's weird because Dark Danny will be able to. Time travel is complicated and confusing, but essentially, what I'm trying to explain is Dark Danny and Danny are both, in a way, ensuring that their future will not exist by creating a timeline where their past selves do not exist, where the evil future self will not exist. Well, which should, in theory, prevent his ghost self from his loved ones from dying, and because Danny knows the rest of the way that he became Dark Danny would not be able to go back in time to actually kill his loved ones, which should recreate a paradox where Dark Danny never came back in time to kill his loved ones. It's complicated, but you get the point. Obviously, Dark Danny killing his loved ones would not actually happen because it would just reset the timeline. But it is interesting. But in any case, that's gonna do it for my review of the special. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It helps support me. Go check out my Discord because we are going to be watching a horror movie at the end of the month. I do want to specify that. I have a plan for what the horror movie is going to be. I do want to keep it a little bit of a surprise, but yeah, I do want to talk with people. I do also need to recruit some people to help with that, but I'll do that. But in any case, yeah, go check that out. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the on the screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, so it's actually a playlist, but it'll show you where Magus Month is, which is the previous one of these I did. It'll also show you Courage Month, which is the first one of these I did for Halloween. But yeah, go check that out. In any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!